Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today we are going to be discussing 10 different Stanley Cup Finals matchups that you won't believe can actually happen. Now this year in the Stanley Cup Finals are pretty much completely wide open. Instead of having the East and the West conferences this year, basically let's say the Colorado Avalanche can only face teams outside of their own division in the Stanley Cup Finals, which means a lot more possibilities for rivalries and a lot more possibilities of what we could see in the final two and the final series of this year's playoffs. But what are the biggest potential rivalries, the most interesting matchups potentially that could happen in this year's Stanley Cup Finals? Which do I think is the most likely out of these 10, and which are the craziest ones that we could possibly come up with? Watch till the end for all of the potential Stanley Cup Finals picks, all the predictions, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. Where right now as I'm recording, 35 subscribers away from 35k, so every bit helps, and we make daily hockey content on this channel. We'd love having the Grav Gang, so thanks so much for coming on. Again, there's going to be some Stanley Cup Final matchups here that you wouldn't even believe could actually happen, but again, with this year's playoff format, will actually potentially come into play. And the first one I think is a great example of that. The first playoff Stanley Cup Final matchup that can actually happen. It is a little bit unrealistic with how likely the first team is to get in, but I think it would be an absolute blast to see these two back in the Stanley Cup Final. First up, between the Montreal Canadiens and the Boston Bruins. Now again, the Montreal Canadiens aren't very likely at all to make the Stanley Cup Final, but still, this potential scenario I think would be so incredibly fun. I don't know about you guys. Of course, with the Montreal Canadiens and the Bruins, they've met 34 total times in the playoffs, but the last time they faced in the Stanley Cup Finals was 1977 and 1978, where they ended up winning. The Montreal Canadiens ended up winning in 6 games. And it's been a long time since we've seen those two teams really battled out for those full stakes. Obviously, again, they've had a lot of first-round matchups and second-round matchups in the last few decades, but nothing that's really come close to that Stanley Cup Final. But it is possible. But just imagine Montreal makes it all the way, the true underdog, gets to the Stanley Cup Final, and on the other side is the Boston Bruins, the biggest old-time rivalry perhaps in hockey, and that's what they have to face off with. That would be an amazingly physical series, a crazy one right to the very end. I think Boston would end up winning, but still, this would be fantastic to actually see happen. We're going to go on to the second playoff Stanley Cup series that you won't believe could actually happen, but it actually is, I think, a much more realistic one than even the first one between the Habs and the Bruins. We're now going to move on to the second one you won't believe between the Toronto Maple Leafs and, again, the Boston Bruins. Now, obviously, we've seen these two teams a ton in the first round the past decade. The Boston Bruins getting the better advantage of the Leafs, but I think this series would be a much more competitive one than the Habs and Bruins one, just for the pure fact of the Leafs are a much more consistent and heavily constructed team, and again, the revenge that could be had against the Bruins in the Stanley Cup Finals, no less, will be amazing. I mean, just imagine the Leafs, they go into the series versus the Bruins, they have all those demons, but they beat the Bruins, and the Bruins get another Stanley Cup Final loss, or the other way around. The Boston Bruins get their first Stanley Cup since 2011 after getting those demons off of them of the Stanley Cup Final, and the Leafs lose again to the Boston Bruins. Either way, there's a ton of storylines here, and this is one that I could see actually realistically happening. This is one that could happen right to the very end, and if the Leafs, again, are able to storm out of the Canadian division, this could be one that I could see actually going down and being an amazing one. There's so many storylines here and so many ways that it could end up going through. Now we're going to go on to another matchup that if it does end up happening would leave me so incredibly excited. We're now going to move on to the third matchup you won't believe can actually happen. We're going to go on to the matchup of the top two best players in the NHL between Connor McDavid and Nathan MacKinnon and the Colorado Avalanche versus the Edmonton Oilers. This is a matchup that I would just be so ecstatic about. It would be absolutely amazing. And another one that I could realistically see happening. I don't see the Oilers making it all the way to the Stanley Cup Final, but it's not out of the realm of possibility, especially if that depth comes through and Connor McDavid is Connor McDavid. But again, the matchup between McDavid and MacKinnon, the top two players in the league, that's the NHL's dream right there to be able to market that, even though they haven't done a great job of marketing IMO, but still a lot of potential there. And not even just in terms of the playoffs, I mean, in the marketing side of things, the playoff series I think would also be pretty good. I think the Avalanche would definitely win that series, but I think the Oilers can make it close, maybe reach it to 6 and 7 games, but I think that would be absolutely amazing to see the top two players battle it out in the Stanley Cup Final. How many times have we been able to say that? But it could happen as soon as this season. Now, if we want to talk about rivalries and storylines, we can now move on to the fourth Stanley Cup final you won't believe can actually happen. This is another one that I'm really excited about potentially happening, especially with the conferences abolished in this year's playoffs, that I think will be absolutely amazing for hockey. We can now move on to the fourth matchup you won't believe can actually happen between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the New York Islanders. Yes, the battle and the return of John Tavares again in New York from Toronto. There's so many storylines here. Again, the Islanders are a super competent team, and they've been proving that so far in that series versus the Pittsburgh Penguins. And when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, obviously making the Stanley Cup final again, that's another storyline that's just absolutely crazy, and Canada would be blowing itself apart at that point. But just imagine the heat, the trash talk, everything, the saltiness on either side. It would be absolutely nuts. Either way, we are getting an absolute explosion from these two fan bases. On one hand, with the Leafs winning, it would be absolutely nuts to see the Islanders fans go crazy. And on the other hand, the Leafs losing in the Stanley Cup final and John Tavares losing against his former team in the Stanley Cup final. Just imagine the trash talk the Islanders fans could say at that point. It would be otherworldly. Either way, whatever happens in this series, I think hockey fans win, and it will be one heck of a storyline right to the very end. But we're going to continue the trend of amazing rivalries that could potentially end us off in this year's playoffs and go to another matchup that would be absolutely incredible. This one now between the Washington Capitals and the Tampa Bay Lightning. If you're looking for physicality, if you're looking for bad blood, this is the series that would set you apart. This is a series that I think would be an absolute bloodbath, would be absolutely traumatic for both playoff teams. But again, these two teams are kind of in similar positions. Both in their current core have one cup to their name, looking for another one to continue to build on those great hopes. But these two teams do have history. They faced off 3 different times in their series, in their playoff history: 2003, 2011, and most recently, of course, 2018. And that 2018 series left some absolutely bitter taste in the Tampa Bay Lightning's mouths. They would end up being even worse in 2019, but rebounding in 2020. But these two teams, don't get me wrong, absolutely hate each other's guts in every single way. If these two teams faced off in the Stanley Cup final, there will be a billion penalty minutes, and that's probably making it a little bit of an understatement. This would be an absolute classic, and will probably be one of the best Stanley Cup finals we have ever seen. I'm not even mentioning Alex Ovechkin, who could end up getting his second cup of his career. But now going on to number 6, and this is the first playoff matchup that could theoretically happen in years past, but is another one that if it does end up happening, it won't even matter. It would still be an absolute classic, and especially when it comes to players returning to their former teams and going against their former teams, it's not the worst thing in the world. We're now going to move on to number 6 in the 6th playoff series you won't believe can actually happen. This time between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Vegas Golden Knights. You know what I'm talking about, that good old Marc-Andre Fleury goodness, being absolutely amazing so far in the playoffs, going against his former team in the Stanley Cup final. This is the playoff series that I actually predicted in my playoff predictions to end up happening. So far, not looking the greatest, as both, as I'm recording this, are 0-1. We'll see what happens tonight, but I do think this series does actually go underway. This would be an absolutely amazing classic. Again, for both sides involved. Vegas looking for their first Stanley Cup after losing in the Stanley Cup final in 2018. Just a massive loss there, but they're rejuvenated, and Marc-Andre Fleury's back to form, and they're back in the Stanley Cup final. Meanwhile, for the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're looking for that last, or at least the closest cup they can get to the fourth for guys like Malkin, guys like Sidney Crosby. But again, Fleury against his favorite, or his former team, going against his former teammates and his former superstars. This would be an absolutely amazing one, and this one would be as well, I think, another matchup that could go all the way to 7 games. But now we can move on to the next Stanley Cup final matchup you won't believe can actually happen. This is another one that would be an absolute classic, but especially in terms of the top 2 players on both sides, would just be absolutely magnificent to see go against each other in the Stanley Cup final when all the stakes are there. For the 7th matchup you won't believe can actually happen, we're now going to move on to McKinnon versus Crosby, the Colorado Avalanche versus the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, obviously, this is another one that could happen in years past, but this is probably the best chance for these two teams to meet in the Stanley Cup final. The Penguins are on their way out. Meanwhile, the Colorado Avalanche are on their way in, looking for their first Stanley Cup final and their first Stanley Cup with this core. They're both on opposite sides of the spectrum, but they still do have the two players Crosby and McKinnon, best friends in real life who train together all the time in the off seasons, battling against each other for the true Stanley Cup. This would be absolutely amazing, and honestly, I would be ecstatic to see it. We've never actually seen this playoff matchup happen before. It would have to have happened in the Stanley Cup final. We've obviously not seen that happen, so this would be an absolute classic. I still think the Avalanche, if it does happen, would win against the Penguins, but either way, this would be an absolute classic and one that you would not want to miss. We're going to go on to number 8 in the 8th playoff series for the Stanley Cup final that you can't believe would actually happen. This one, we're actually going to go to a series that couldn't happen in years past, but go to a series that could be probably, if it happens at least, one of the most entertaining Stanley Cup finals we could really ever see. Next up, between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is the series that I always wanted to see happen with the Atlantic Division. I always wanted to see them face off in round 1, but it never seemed to end up happening. Unfortunately for Toronto, faced Columbus, faced Boston 2 times, didn't exactly go their way in those ones. But I think in this potential Stanley Cup series, there is so much to like here. Both of these teams are extremely entertaining, extremely star-powered. I still think the Tampa Bay Lightning would have the advantage in this one, but man, seeing the players in the Leafs going against a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, who's already won that cup, I mean, both of these teams could actually be pretty similar in the end, where the Tampa Bay Lightning took a long time with that core to eventually win the Stanley Cup. So far, something like that might be the same way for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they're looking to get their first Stanley Cup, but it might be a learning experience for them as the same thing it was for the Tampa Bay Lightning back in 2015 against the Blackhawks. It is all connected. I didn't even realize this. It's all connected. It's all the same thing, and they're all battling against each other. This would be absolutely amazing, and again, will be another series that you would not want to miss 1 second of. But now we're going to move on to a number 9, and probably one of the most interesting and connected and old rivalry matchups we've seen in the NHL, especially when it comes to the Stanley Cup final. This is one that would also be an absolute bloodbath, I would think, and would be one that I could see going either way potentially. We're now going to move on to the 9th Stanley Cup final that you won't believe can actually happen. This one between the Edmonton Oilers and the Boston Bruins. This is one that, in terms of the top players, aren't exactly connected. Obviously, Connor McDavid is better than anybody the Boston Bruins have, but this has a lot of rivalry and a lot of playoff experience. For the Edmonton Oilers and the Boston Bruins, they've only met twice, but both times were in the Stanley Cup final in 1988 and 1990. Both of those times, the Edmonton Oilers ended up winning the Stanley Cup, and the Boston Bruins, both times, I believe, got swept in those series. So some bad blood between those two franchises will spill over, I think, into this one. Connor McDavid looking for his first cup, the Boston Bruins looking for their last cup, potentially, with that current core. There's a lot to look forward to there, and another series that I think would be just, again, an absolute bloodbath, and might be a little bit violent too, especially as that series goes on. But I'm talking about this Oilers and Bruins series as a bloodbath. You won't even believe how much of a bloodbath this last playoff matchup in the Stanley Cup final would actually be like. I would be concerned for some of the players on both teams if this actually does end up going through. This is a series that I think would be just obliterating on each side. It would be an absolute tax fest. It would be just horrendous for both sides physically. It'll be an absolute grind. It'll be an absolutely amazing matchup, and one that I've dreamed to see in the Stanley Cup final, especially with these two current cores. These two teams have faced off 3 times in the past decade: 2011, 2018, and most recently in 2020, where things got pretty out of hands. But going on to number 10, and the final playoff matchup you won't believe can actually happen. Again, I think there will be some hospitals that might be full after this playoff series. We're now going to move on to the Tampa Bay Lightning versus the Boston Bruins. Just imagine how much chaos would happen in this Stanley Cup final. The Tampa Bay Lightning looking for their second back-to-back cup final win. The Bruins looking for their final one with this current core. But just imagine, with all the physical players that both teams have here, it would just be haymaking on both sides. It would be absolutely terrible for the players involved there. But I think in the end, it would probably go to a Game 7 series, because how else would it have to end? Probably the Tampa Bay Lightning would end up winning this thing. But again, this potential playoff series could have never happened before, but it could potentially happen this year. And this being the final end to the start of the 2021 playoffs, and the end of it would be absolutely fitting. I would love to see this actually happen, and I would love to see this come up in real life. Let's hope that we actually get some of these series potentially in this year's Stanley Cup final. That'll be it for today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and please hit that notification bell as well to to get notified when we are live for playoff streams, when we go live with new videos and everything like that. Make sure you comment down below which of these playoff series would you want to actually see happen in the Stanley Cup final this year, which do you think is the most realistic as well. And make sure you share this video with your friends. Without your help, the videos don't get out there, but sharing this with your friends, especially the potential cup matchups, will get other people informed and definitely helps a ton as well on the channel. And of course, make sure you click on this card for all of my playoff talk right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.